There are crimes that capture our attention. And then there are crimes that capture our imagination. They become something more than just a case file. They become folklore. A story told and retold about a man who committed a perfect crime and then simply ceased to exist. He was a shadow against a stormy sky, a man with a quiet voice, a briefcase, and a plan so audacious, so utterly brazen, it has never been solved. He boarded an ordinary passenger plane, extorted a fortune, and then stepped out the back into the heart of a tempest, disappearing into the dark tapestry of American legend. To truly understand how this was possible, we have to go back to the night it all began. It's the day before Thanksgiving, 1971. The air over the Pacific Northwest is heavy with cold rain and the promise of a coming storm. Inside Portland International Airport, there's a familiar holiday chaos. Families rushing to gates, announcements echoing through the terminal. It's a scene of total normalcy. But in the midst of it all, one man moves with a singular, quiet purpose. His journey has nothing to do with a Thanksgiving feast. He walks to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter. A man in a business suit, unremarkable in every way. He requests a one-way ticket for Flight 305, a short 30-minute trip up to Seattle. He pays the $20 fare with a single bill in cash. The name he gives for the ticket is Dan Cooper, a simple alias that, thanks to an early reporting error, would soon become immortalized as D.B. Cooper. Every witness who saw him that day would later say the same thing. He was completely forgettable. A man in his mid-40s, perhaps, dressed in a dark suit, a starched white shirt, a skinny black tie clipped neatly in place, and a dark raincoat. He carried a standard black attaché case. He was the definition of ordinary, a face you'd pass on the street and never look at twice. He boarded the Boeing 727, registration N467US, and found his seat. He settled into seat 18E, near the very back of the plane. As the aircraft taxied for its 2:50 p.m. departure, he lit a Raleigh filter-tipped cigarette, the smoke curling around him. He flagged down a flight attendant and ordered a bourbon and soda. He paid for his drink, and then he waited, calmly, patiently. He was a man who knew his moment was coming. Shortly after the plane reached cruising altitude, he motioned to a young flight attendant, Florence Schaffner. He passed her a folded note. Thinking it was just another lonely businessman's phone number, she dropped it, unread, into her purse. Cooper leaned toward her, his face impassive, his voice perfectly level. "Miss," he said, "you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." In that instant, the mundane flight to Seattle became a federal crime scene, suspended 10,000 feet in the air. A stunned Florence Schaffner retrieved the note. Its message was simple and terrifying. Cooper asked her to sit next to him, and then he unlatched his black attaché case, opening it just a few inches, just enough for her to see. Her blood ran cold. Inside was a frightening nest of wires, a large battery, and 8 red cylinders that looked exactly like sticks of dynamite. The threat was not a bluff. The hijacking was underway. Transmitting his demands to the cockpit, Cooper revealed a plan of remarkable clarity and forethought. He wanted $200,000, not in large bills, but in unmarked $20 bills. He also wanted 4 parachutes, 2 primary back chutes, and 2 reserve front chutes. And he wanted a fuel truck standing by in Seattle. The demand for 4 parachutes was a stroke of genius. It created a critical uncertainty for the FBI. Would he take a hostage? It forced them to provide him with real working parachutes, preventing any attempt at sabotage. It was a checkmate before the game had even truly begun. Let's not understate the scale of this demand. In 1971, $200,000 was a fortune. It was the kind of money that could buy you a new life several times over. It was the price of a small fleet of new cars or a handful of suburban homes. This was not just a robbery, it was a life-altering heist. To really grasp the gravity of it, think about today's money. In 2025, that ransom would be worth well over $1.6 million. Cooper wasn't just gambling for pocket change. He was playing for a king's ransom, and he was betting the lives of everyone on board to get it. As Cooper calmly ordered a second bourbon, the world below was a whirlwind of frantic activity. The pilot, under Cooper's instruction, informed the 36 other passengers of a minor mechanical issue requiring them to circle. For 2 hours, Flight 305 flew a lazy holding pattern over Puget Sound. The passengers drank, chatted, and read, completely unaware of the high-stakes drama unfolding just a few rows behind them as the FBI scrambled on the ground to gather nearly 10,000 $20 bills. Another flight attendant, Tena Bar, became his primary point of contact. At one point, she tried to understand his motives, asking if he held some sort of grudge against the airline. His answer was calm, chilling, and deeply enigmatic. "I don't have a grudge against your airline, miss," he said. "I just have a grudge." A grudge against what? Against whom? It was the only hint he would ever give, a clue that only deepened the shadows around him. As darkness fell, the ransom was ready. At 5:39 p.m., the Boeing 727 finally landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Cooper directed the pilot to a remote, isolated part of the tarmac, flooded with harsh lights. An airline employee carrying a heavy knapsack filled with the cash and the parachutes approached the plane. Cooper had the items brought aboard. True to his word, he then released all 36 passengers and Florence Schaffner. They walked off the plane into the cold, rainy night, utterly oblivious that they had just been hostages in what was about to become America's greatest unsolved mystery. But he was far from done. With a skeleton crew of 4 remaining, Cooper laid out the second and final phase of his plan. These instructions showcased a chillingly specific knowledge of the Boeing 727. He ordered them to fly south towards Mexico City with a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. But the flight parameters he dictated were precise and incredibly dangerous. He wanted the plane to fly no higher than 10,000 feet, keeping the cabin unpressurized. He wanted the speed kept low, no more than 170 knots, with the wing flaps set to 15 degrees and the landing gear down, a configuration that slowed the plane but made it difficult to fly. And then, the most critical demand of all, he told them that he would be lowering the aft air stairs in the middle of the flight. After a tense argument over refueling procedures, Cooper became insistent. "Let's get this show on the road," he told the crew. At 7:40 p.m., the plane lumbered back into the sky, climbing into the black, stormy night. What Cooper didn't know was that he wasn't alone. 2 F-106 fighter jets had been scrambled from a nearby Air Force base to track him, flying blind in the storm, out of his sight. Before they were fully airborne, he ordered Tena Bar into the cockpit with the rest of the crew. He was now alone in the passenger cabin, with his money, his parachutes, and his plan. What happened next is the heart of the legend. At exactly 8 p.m., a small warning light blinked on in the cockpit. The aft stairs were down. Cooper had opened the back of the plane to the violent, storm-filled night. For 13 agonizing minutes, the crew flew on, staring at the light. Then, at 8:13 p.m., somewhere over the dense, black forests of southwestern Washington, the pilots felt it. A sudden oscillation in the cabin pressure, a quick, upward bump in the tail section. They knew instantly what it meant. A weight had just been removed from the aircraft. He had jumped. Let's just pause and consider the sheer insanity of what he did. Inside the cabin, it was dimly lit, relatively quiet, but outside was a hurricane. He stepped off that staircase into a pitch-black, moonless night with zero visibility, into driving, freezing rain. The air temperature was a brutal -7 degrees Celsius, but with the wind from the plane's speed, the wind chill would have felt like -50. And he did this wearing a business suit and a pair of loafers with a 20-pound bag of cash strapped to his body, plunging into one of the most rugged, unforgiving wilderness areas in North America. 2 hours later at 10:15 p.m., Flight 305 touched down in Reno. Surrounded by law enforcement, FBI agents stormed the plane, weapons drawn. They found it completely empty. The aft staircase was still deployed, so low it had scraped along the runway on landing. But of Dan Cooper, there was nothing. Not a single trace. He had literally vanished into the night. The man himself was a ghost, but he hadn't left an empty stage. The FBI began their meticulous search of the cabin, collecting the few precious breadcrumbs he'd left behind. On seat 18E, they found his black clip-on tie, a cheap J.C. Penney Towncroft brand, along with its mother-of-pearl clip. In the ashtray, 8 of his Raleigh cigarette butts. From the armrests and magazines, they lifted 66 latent fingerprints that matched no one in their databases. These meager items were the only tangible connection to the phantom who called himself Dan Cooper. In the days and weeks that followed, the FBI launched one of the most massive and exhaustive manhunts in American history. They codenamed it NORJAK for Northwest Hijacking. Hundreds of soldiers conducted grid searches through the dense, thorny forests of the suspected jump zone. Helicopters and planes scoured the canopy from above. They searched for a man, a body, a parachute, a briefcase, anything. They found nothing. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed him whole. As the search turned up empty, the FBI's criminal profilers went to work. They believed Cooper's calm demeanor, his meticulous planning, and his apparent knowledge of the 727's unique features pointed away from an amateur. This was likely not a recreational skydiver. This was probably a man with military experience, perhaps an ex-paratrooper or aircrew member who knew exactly the risks he was taking and how to mitigate them. Over 5 decades, the FBI investigated more than 1,000 potential suspects. The most compelling for a time was a man named Richard McCoy Jr., a Vietnam veteran who, just 5 months after the Cooper hijacking, pulled off a near-identical heist. But when you look closer, the pieces just don't fit. Cooper was described as being in his mid-40s. McCoy was 29. Cooper had dark, intense eyes. McCoy's were blue. Cooper drank bourbon and chain smoke. McCoy was a Mormon who didn't drink or smoke. McCoy was eventually caught, but most investigators believe he was a copycat, not the original. The real Cooper remained a ghost. Compounding the problem was the simple fact that no one could agree on what he looked like. Based on the recollections of the different crew members, the FBI produced several distinct composite sketches of Dan Cooper. In one, he's angular and gaunt. In another, his face is fuller, almost soft. He was so generic, so utterly average in his appearance, that his face became a shifting mask, a blank slate onto which anyone could be projected. He was, in essence, faceless. For 9 long years, the case grew colder and colder, gathering dust in the FBI's files. The legend grew, but the evidence did not. And then, in February of 1980, a breakthrough came from the most unlikely of sources. An 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was on a family picnic, digging a fire pit on a sandy stretch of the Columbia River, when his fingers brushed against something buried in the sand. He pulled out 3 crumbling, mud-caked bundles of cash. In total, it was $5,800. The boy's family turned the money over to the FBI. Investigators painstakingly separated the fragile $20 bills and checked the serial numbers against their master list from the 1971 ransom. It was a 100% match. After nearly a decade of silence, here was tangible proof. But this discovery opened a brand new Pandora's box of questions. The money was found miles downstream from the presumed drop zone. How did it get there? Did it wash down the river, or did Cooper himself leave it there? Was this a clue or a deliberate red herring? The decades rolled on. In 2016, the FBI officially suspended the active investigation, acknowledging the case may never be solved. But the mystery was too alluring to die. A team of citizen scientists and forensic experts got permission to re-examine the single most personal piece of evidence: Cooper's black clip-on tie. Using a powerful technology called a scanning electron microscope, they could analyze every fiber, looking for microscopic clues invisible in 1971.
And what they found was astounding. The tie was a chemical roadmap of the wearer's life. It was contaminated with over 100,000 microscopic particles of rare metals, things like pure titanium, cerium, and strontium sulfide. These are not materials you encounter in everyday life. They are, however, incredibly common in one specific place: a high-tech aerospace or chemical engineering facility. The new evidence suggested Cooper may not have been just a paratrooper, but perhaps a manager or an engineer at a company like Boeing, a man who walked among schematics and prototypes, a clue that had been hiding in plain sight for 40 years.
And so, the mystery endures, deeper and more compelling than ever. He was a man with a plan, a grudge, and nerves of steel. He defied the FBI, defeated a storm, and pulled off a heist so perfect it became a modern myth. Did he survive the jump, slipping away to live a quiet life on his stolen fortune? Or did the unforgiving wilderness claim him that night, his bones and the rest of his money still lying undiscovered in some forgotten ravine? Over half a century has passed, and we are left with the same haunting question. Will we ever really know the face of the man who stepped out of a plane and into legend?